Hi everyone, it is Thursday and today we are going to be working on some more detailed analysis of the poem Ozymandias. So your first task is to attempt these recall questions which are on the screen in front of you and they are reproduced on your worksheet. So have a look at those and go ahead and input your own answers into the Word document and then come back and we will go through the answers together. Okay, I'm assuming that you have done that now, so we're going to go through the answers to these questions. So, first question was, in your own words, what does the traveller say that he saw in the desert? Obviously, I can't answer in your own words, but I can answer in my own words. So, I'll just say something like, along the lines of a statue, legs and head, huge. Okay, so if you've got anything along the lines of that, a massive statue of which only the legs and head remain, that is fine. Question number 2. What was the expression on the face of the statue? So the question directs you to the lines 4 to 6 of the poem, and there was a copy of the poem printed on your worksheet, so you should have been able to look at those lines 4 to 6. Now we could just do that. I'll just go over to the one that we looked at yesterday, lines 4 to 6. So, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. So I'm not going to quote that directly, but I am just going to say something like negative expression, frown, sneer. So anything if you've said about his expression being negative, frowning or sneering, conveying kind of disdain for his subjects. What was written on the pedestal of the statue? Now remember, pedestal means kind of the base of the statue. I'm just going to do that one up here because I haven't got much room. And what was written on it was, my name is Ozymandias. I won't write the whole thing out. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. And remember how we discussed yesterday how that was quite an ironic inscription because obviously Ozymandias' works are no longer visible and he's boasting about them to imaginary people basically. So all of his power is gone, but he doesn't know that. Only we as the reader know that. Question number 4. What do you imagine was probably around the statue when these words were carved onto it? So he says, look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair, which is implying really that around it there's some kind of big things that he has created, perhaps a city, perhaps perhaps a city or a civilization, or military based things. Anything that would convey his power as a leader. So anything like that. What's around the statue now? Well, around the statue now, as we learn later in the poem, is nothing. Nothing beside remains, as Shelley says. The boundless and bare, lone and level sands stretch far away, so there's only the desert left surrounding the statue. And that, like we said yesterday, conveys how Ozymandias' power only existed within his lifetime, and the sands of time have kind of eroded all of his power, and now he's just a few legs in the middle of the desert. So number 6, what must have happened to the empire of Ozymandias? So obviously the empire has fallen. It is gone. So anything along those lines. Right, brilliant. So today we are going to have a look at the poem in a little bit more detail and we're going to analyse some of the aspects of language, form and structure that make up the poem. So I have colour-coded my analysis today. So everything in yellow is language analysis. Everything in this kind of pinky colour is form and blue is structure. So you'll probably see mostly yellow and blue, but we will talk a little bit about the form. And we'll do that now just to get that out of the way. Okay, so here we go. Computer's being a bit slow today. Right, that is the finished analysis of the poem, and we're going to go through each part of this together. So we're going to start with a form, and as you know, Ozymandias is a sonnet. It's 14 lines long. It is written in iambic pentameter. Yeah, so the interesting thing about that as a point to analyse the form is that Ozymandias is actually a blend of what we call a Petrarchan and a Shakespearean sonnet. So there are a couple of different types of sonnets, but Ozymandias blends these two types, and we can see that based on the rhyme scheme. So I've labelled the rhyme scheme there for you. It's A B A B A C D C E D E F E F. So in summary, the rhyme scheme of Ozymandias links what we call the octave, the first 8 lines, to the sestet, which is the last 6 lines, and that's in the style of a Petrarchan sonnet, but there are also some aspects of it which are Shakespearean. So you could argue that whilst the poem Ozymandias is arguing that power kind of shifts over time, that is reflected in the way that it blends the use of Petrarchan and Shakespearean sonnets. But also, I think a good point to make about the form of Ozymandias and the reason that Shelley uses the sonnet is kind of, we know that sonnets are supposed to be about love, about romantic love and shared between a man and a woman. But in this case, it is a love of power that is conveyed in this poem. So it's kind of ironic that Shelley would use the sonnet form. And he's done that on purpose. He's used it because he's talking about a love of power. Okay, so that's our sort of very short analysis of form. So we're going to move on now to look at elements of language and structure. Okay, so the first thing I've highlighted in blue is this opening line, I met a traveller from an antique land. So we're going to talk about that now. So Shelley frames this poem as a story told by a stranger. So he says, I met a traveller from an antique land, somebody from far away. And he does that to potentially distance himself from the anti-monarchical views that he conveys in the poem. So in the poem, he kind of presents Ozymandias in a very negative way. And as we said yesterday, Ozymandias could also be a metaphor for the King of England at the time, George III. So it's very important for Shelley that he manages to kind of distance himself personally from the depiction of Ozymandias in this poem. So framing it as a story told by a traveller is a really clever way of doing that. And I'd like to focus just in a little bit more detail on this word antique. So Romantic poets, the second generation, which is the one that Shelley is a part of, often set their poems in kind of distant time periods like Greece or Egypt. And they did that for a reason, because they wanted to kind of get back to that time period in their mind. So this word antique, it connotes like age and exoticism, somewhere like Egypt or Greece. And again, distance, putting time as well as distance between Shelley and the views in this poem. Okay, so I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. So there we've got that image there of the vast and trunkless legs of stone. So we'll have a look quickly at those words. So they're both adjectives, vast and trunkless, and vast means huge, as you know. And I think that suggests that Ozymandias wanted this statue of himself to be imposing and to convey power. So that word vast, powerful, huge, massive. But trunkless. So it's kind of a bit of juxtaposition there. They're very contrasting images. So trunkless means without a body. So these legs are just standing in the desert without a body. This image is kind of weird and incongruous. You don't expect it. It's disjointed. We expect the vast legs to be connected to something. So this power, it's got nowhere to go. He clearly was powerful, but now none of that remains. He's only his legs that have survived. Vast and trunkless. So you can zoom in on those words and have a look at what they mean. So then here we've got an interesting bit of punctuation in the middle of a line. Stand in the desert. Then we've got this ellipsis in the middle of the line, and that is called caesura. So that's how you spell that. It's an interesting word. It's an interesting poetic technique, which is where you have kind of a line break in the middle of a line, so the sentence finishes in the middle of a line of poetry. So this creates a pause, doesn't it? Because at the end of a sentence we always pause when we're reading, and it allows the image of those vast and trunkless legs to sink into the mind of the reader. And we wonder, don't we, what has happened to Ozymandias? And we kind of start to appreciate the destruction of his power. So it allows that image of the legs to sink into our minds. So that's interesting. And Shelley has done that on purpose. So then you move on. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. So he moves on from talking about the legs, and he's now focusing on the face that lies very near it in the sand. Remember, visage means face. So we'll just come across here and look at that language in a bit more detail. So I've focused on the words sunk and shattered, which are powerful negative verbs that kind of convey Ozymandias's fall from power. And within those verbs, we've got these harsh plosive sounds, T and K, sunk, shattered, kind of explosive within the mouth. And these sounds maybe suggest the violence of that loss of power. You could argue maybe that he fell from power in a violent way. And as does the image of the shattered face. So what could have happened to his face? Why is it shattered? Why is it broken? So we've got this kind of idea that maybe he fell from power in quite a violent way. And then we move on to thinking about his frown and his wrinkled lip. So that's part of a triple, isn't it? The frown, the wrinkled lip, and the sneer of cold command. They form a triple which describes his face. And it kind of emphasizes his cruel face and the fact that it's been captured by a sculpture. Because, you know, frown, it's a negative facial expression, isn't it? Something's gone wrong if you're frowning. And his wrinkled lip, he's kind of conveying his disgust, wrinkling his lip. So again, there, Shelley's kind of showing us that he really doesn't like the monarchy and the fact that people can have so much power, and he's presenting Ozymandias in a really negative way. Like, not only is he frowning, but he's got a wrinkled lip and his face is sunk, shattered. And this sneer of cold command. Now that's a really nice phrase from Shelley there. So I'm just going to zoom in on this and have a look at that in a bit more detail. Sneer of cold command. Now a sneer. Now we've had the negative facial expression frown, but a sneer is even more evocative. It kind of conveys evil in a way, because you're only going to sneer if you're evil. And perhaps we could argue in that way that it demonstrates the corrupting influence of power because it has connotations of evil. But it also kind of shows his disgust at his subjects. Like this statue is intended to kind of encapsulate what he was like as a ruler, and he's sneering in cold command. And I really like this phrase, cold command. It's a alliterative phrase, both beginning, as you can see, with the same letter C. That emphasizes his power and influence. You've got this harsh sound, C, cold command. And command, you could also argue, suggests that he was a military leader. So perhaps sheds some light on the way that he ruled. And that's links to our context, because we know that both Ozymandias, both doesn't have an E on the end, both Ozymandias and George III were military rulers. Okay. So then we move down towards the end of the poem. We sort of skip the bit in the middle because there's less in there to look at. I mean, this is not an exhaustive analysis by any means, and there's lots of things within that middle section that you could pick out, but we are going to focus on these bits at the end. So nothing beside remains. So he's talked about the head, the face, how the sculptor has preserved those horrible facial expressions of Ozymandias. Perhaps he's mocking him. That phrase, the hand that mocked him, could imply that the artist is mocking Ozymandias and that his is the only work that has survived. So actually he's won, and this depiction of Ozymandias is the enduring one. And then he talks about what is written on the pedestal. Remember, we talked about yesterday how that inscription, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair." How that was ironic because his works no longer exist. Everything, the desert around him is bare, and he compares himself to Jesus, which is an example of his arrogance. Compares to Jesus, and a really good word to use there is hubris, which is just a fancy way of saying arrogance. And that is kind of the message of the poem, that human arrogance, human hubris, does not last, and it will be erased by the passage of time. So we're going to look at this sentence here. Nothing beside remains. It's a short sentence. It opens with a negative, nothing. The negative is nothing. And it is reflective of the demise of Ozymandias' kingdom. So it tells us that nothing beside remains, everything is gone. And then again, we've got caesura, because we've got a short sentence, so there's a full stop in the middle of the line, which kind of tells us that power is finite. It has an end. That's what finite means. It has an end. So it suggests the finite nature of power for humanity. It does not last. It's not worth pursuing in your life. That's kind of Shelley's message. And then lastly, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Okay, so we've got that word decay, which kind of indicates maybe death, a body decomposing. It's not a nice word. It tells us about the harshness of Ozymandias' loss of power. It resulted in his death, and now he's gone and decaying. So we're going to look at that phrase, colossal wreck, in a little bit more detail. Now, I really like that that phrase there, colossal wreck, because it's kind of juxtaposition, isn't it? Because colossal means, vast, just like up in the beginning of the poem, and wreck suggests that vastness has been compromised. So it kind of encapsulates the nature of Ozymandias. He is both vast and wrecked at the same time. So there's echoes of power and strength, but it's been wrecked, it's gone. So we know that once he was powerful, but now he isn't, and that is really conveyed within this phrase, this juxtaposed phrase, colossal wreck. And that's a really, really effective way that Shelley shows us the nature of power, the fact that, you could have been vast and colossal in the past, but now it's a wreck. And you notice that wreck is capitalized there, which is showing that it's an important word. So boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So I'm just going to focus in on those two alliterative phrases, boundless and bare and lone and level. So they kind of show us the emptiness, don't they, and the fleeting nature of power. So the emptiness is kind of conveyed by this idea of boundlessness. It means without borders. Bare, obviously, if you've got a bare cupboard, there's nothing in it. Lone, again, Ozymandias is alone in the desert. And level. So that's an interesting one, because obviously, if there once was a city around Ozymandias, now there isn't, and the ground is level. But also you've got this reference to the sands of time, the lone and level sands. So it's set in a desert, but also the poet is referencing the sands of time. Put a little sand timer there just to illustrate that for you. This idea that that time will erase everything. So you might build a sandcastle in the sand, or you might, sculpt a mermaid, or whatever it is you do on the beach. But at the end of the day, the sea is going to come in and wash it all away, and there'll be no evidence of it, which is exactly what has happened to Ozymandias' kingdom. Okay, so now we've had a look at that poem in a little bit more detail and done some analysis of the language, the form, and the structure. You can go away and complete the little text boxes of analysis on your worksheet. So they will be linked to what we have done today, and you should be able to put that analysis into your own words. And we are going to use that analysis tomorrow to write a paragraph about the nature of power in Ozymandias, which is what we've been looking at all week. Okay, brilliant. Right, guys, see you tomorrow.